Operations and Monitoring Committee for the 5th of July 2018. I'd like to welcome everybody here today, including members of the public, senior staff, councillors, board members and titaru. Also, we've got a huge crowd in the press gallery today. We've got 2, which is wonderful. I'd like to, the first item on the agenda is apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Hunt and Councillor Gould, and I also will put on an apology for Councillor Tapsell. Do I have a mover unless there's other apologies? Move Councillor Donaldson, seconded Councillor Okawa-Tate. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against, carried. You're all well aware that this meeting is live streamed. I noticed that 754 people watched the last full council meeting, which is, it's growing in stature. So obviously people are, because of the reactions in the media, are now wanting to be directly informed. Oh, sorry, I put your apology in, Councillor Tapsell. Welcome. Can you make sure your cell phones are turned off and not on the table? We'll have breaks so that you can take any urgent messages. So it is confirmed. Oh, you've removed it. Thank you, Carol. Are there any declarations of interest as per the agenda item number 2 with regard to any of the items on the agenda? Okay, thank you. Urgent items not on the agenda. Does any member have an urgent item that isn't on the agenda? Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you. It was just an item that I wish just to bring up, whether it's just a discussion in the confidential, just regarding the communications of an issue that was out in the public recently.
Public what? Okay. Councillor Tapsell. Thank you, Councillor Tapsell. In confidential, I'm happy with that. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This isn't an urgent item, but I would like to move a procedural motion that item 3, recommendation 3, concerning Terrax, be moved into open debate.
As chair of the meeting, I'm be guided by you. I'm quite happy that that be the situation. Staff have no objection. There's nothing of a confidential nature in there, Councillor Kent, and thank you for that. So we'll put that in the public excluder. I'll take that after the operations report as per the flow of the agenda, if that's okay with members. Thank you very much. Confirmation of the minutes. Yes, Your Worship. Sorry.
Could I just signal that I will be leaving at around 12:15 for a funeral?
Okay. Confirmation of minutes with Councillor Maxwell. You're going to the same funeral? Okay. Thank you. Okay, the confirmation of minutes for the 3rd time. You're going to the same funeral too, Councillor Martin? Okay. Geez, I hope we got a quorum. Oh, yeah, we should have. Not a problem. Minutes. Would someone like to move that the minutes of the Operation and Monitoring Committee held on the 7th of June 2018 be accepted as a true and correct record? Councillor Okawa-Tate. Councillor Tapsell. Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in the minutes. I'm as no attendance. Apologise for that, but I was actually caught up with the state of the civil emergency in Nongataha Valley at the particular time. I had no communication to get back to council apart from get in a car and come here. I wasn't no attendance, but I'm giving the reason why, please.
I think the committee would be receptive that the minutes be amended to note that it was not a non-apologies, non-attendance because of the circumstances. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Mr. Martin. Okay, we'll move now to page 12. The financial performance for the 11 months ended the 31st of May. Mr. Colley will be giving us an overview. Where's he going? Oh, okay. Now, I do want to take a bit of time on this, ladies and gentlemen, because we're getting towards the end of the financial year reporting round, and as you can see in Mr. Colley's report, he's given absolute details on the unders and overs, the factors that have impacted on our overall performance. And I think we need to have an understanding, because I can see the headlines now: blowout in the budget, council debt unsafe, da 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 da. So I do want to take some time on this so that everybody understands and gets an opportunity to ask questions. Mr. Colley, welcome.
Thank you, Chair. My apologies, I accidentally had the wrong presentation in there, so I just had to quickly fix it. So I will be giving an update of the 11 months, but obviously we are aware that we're now in the new financial year and that the previous year has ended, so I can give an update on where we've ended the year with regards to our debt and the reasonings for some of that. With regards to the operating position, so at the 11-month position, we're approximately 2.4 million behind budget, so we are continuing to face operating pressures, with that being offset against increased revenues. And for the remainder of June, we saw those pressures continuing. So those pressures themselves is what we've talked about is in the report. In the main, while electricity prices stabilised because of flooding events and high volumes of water, we did incur a little bit of additional cost in that area as well. It's not a reflection of our pricing strategy or how we acquire electricity expenditure. It's just a reflection of the climate and the circumstances that this region is currently experiencing. On top of that, obviously, we're still in response to the flooding event in Nongataha and have mobilised the organisation around that. That saw significant overtime as a result of this organisation and its response, and as well as incurring additional expenditure for that, and also tidying up the damage and effects from the previous storm events earlier in the year as well. The Shimpak closure has also had a bit of an impact on the organisation now with regards to the loss of revenue that we would have seen through that facility going forward. The EEC has sort of clawed a little bit of that back. You've probably seen in the last month quite a bit of activity down in that space, but unfortunately, though, it's not been enough to offset the shortfalls in that area. And we continue to experience as well high volumes of urban waste going into the landfill, and so that area in particular has continued to experience the cost pressures. That's one of the significant ones that we have rectified in this current year's now budget with regards to the year one of the LTP, so obviously we don't anticipate that problem existing going forward. Capital expenditure, so it is tracking ahead of budget, so it's still pressures from three probably key projects that were budgeted in the previous financial year and for valid reasons came across into this financial year, and obviously had no budget attached to it this year because the budget sets in the previous year unspent. And that one was the eyesight, so that was the timing of the eyesight, and obviously that variation around the asbestos that was found there. The library project moving across into this financial year as well, and that was approximately $3 million of its expenditure. Just reiterate again that library project did come in under budget, so it was a result of timing, not additional costs. And then the weather delays that were impacting on the inner city, Te Manua and Jean Batten and those sorts of elements where we saw the significant rain events just constantly delaying that work, and that pushed that work into this financial year as well. In addition to that, we did, obviously our goal was to end the year on as close to budget or on budget with regards to our capital expenditure. So we did reduce some of our roading program, and that's resulted in a small reduction in capital subsidies. Rotorua, that new sewerage scheme is progressing extremely well. However, the expenditure that relates to a $4 million contribution from the Ministry of Health has been delayed into next financial year, so we'll therefore see that subsidy come through next year, not this year. And so the combination of those two is probably about a $5 million effect of capital subsidies that we expected to receive this year, will likely now receive in the following year and next year. Partially been offset by property sales, so you'd be pleased to know that 3 of the Western Road properties have been sold, and also the Kipling Crescent property was sold as well. Won't go into the specifics of that, but of the good news story, that's been a pretty good news story with regards to being able to sell those at some good values. a reflection of where that currently sits. So when you bring that all together, our opening debt was 168.7 million. We had planned to borrow 7.4 million. The majority of that was obviously tied to the Rotorua sewerage scheme, so that would bring our borrowings up to 176.1. However, we have, as you can see, been impacted by some shortfalls. Now, please be aware that these shortfalls that I've put up here are my estimates to just give you a guide as to how we've come to that end of year figure, and they will obviously firm that up and give you the specifics of that in the coming months as we prepare our annual report. But unfortunately, what's happened is that from operations, we have generated $2.5 million of less cash flows than we anticipated. And those cash flows are ones that we use to fund our capital expenditure. And the $2.5 million, if you were to put it succinctly, was effectively tied down to those aspects that I talked about before around the waste management, the electricity, and the storm events that haven't been able to be offset and mitigated. Capital expenditure is tracking about $5 million ahead of budget, and again, that's a result of the timing of those 3 projects that I talked to you about before. The lack of, therefore, the capital subsidies that has come in, and predominantly from Rotorua, again, that's a timing one. That's scheduled to come in next year now, not this year. And then there's also quite a bit tied up in working capital. So we have been promised money from a number of sources, and obviously while we accrue it from an accounting perspective, we're still awaiting those cash receipts. And a good example of that might be the MB funding that was recently announced, which has incurred expenditure already, which we're waiting for. So therefore, unfortunately, when you do bring that all together, it does paint the picture that debt has increased to 189.6 million. So it's probably, as I said, not ideal, but it actually, unfortunately, is a reflection of the difficult circumstances that we faced during the year, as well as, again, the high completion rate of our infrastructural programs as well, and how they've been progressing.
So, Thomas, when the capital subsidies come in, they're offset against debt.
Yeah, and those capital subsidies, we were aware of those last month, and as we signalled to you that the Rotorua one was being delayed, and we have already reflected that into our LTP. So we did amend our LTP before adoption to reflect that, yes.
So 189 is, if we get those subsidies, is on the downward track. The 189 will reduce once those subsidies come on board, is it? Is that what I'm hearing?
Effectively, the lack of and timing of those subsidies, that our future debt increases that we would have had has just been pulled slightly forward.
Slowed down. Okay, thank you. Right, anything else, Thomas? Questions around the table, Your Worship.
Thank you for that, Thomas. And just some questions around the flood, because I'm amazed it's 800,000, because I was aware at times there were 91 staff moved into their day-to-day job into immediate response, and also the payment of the navigators who are turning out to be gold in this recovery stage. That's a cost to council that I questioned in the wider civil defence and emergency management team. I was just very aware that Edgecombe, it was funded jointly by DHB and MSD, not council. So that's a cost we seem to be incurring, that while they're doing a great job. I wonder if that's worth pursuing, or do you think we just absorb it?
So yes, through you, Chair, Your Worship, there is quite a bit of expenditure that we've incurred to date, which we're entitled to claim back for, which we're still working through. Yep. But there's also expenditure that particularly relates to staff expenditure on our end, while we did ramp up and while we did bring on additional staff as well. Unfortunately, that's not something we can claim back, but that is something that I'm aware Stavros and the team are going to have an active discussion on to see as to whether we can do some of that.
And does that include the roading funding shortfall that we did ask for some more support for those rural roads?
Yes, and so we also reflected that into our long-term plan. So so we're aware that we will have to spend an additional $5 million at least next in the 2019 financial year, and so we did amend the long-term plan
cater for that.
To cater for that, yes.
Mr. Jim Stanton, welcome, Jim.
Kia ora, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Thomas. I'm sometimes bamboozled by accounting reports, but when you're talking about Rotorua expenditure versus subsidies, if you got the subsidy for Rotorua, that would balance the subsidies, but the total deficit is 8.3, which seems to mean that the expenditure is another 4,000 over the subsidy. Can you just explain how that happens? Have you actually brought forward some of the work in the Rotorua scheme, which accounts for the additional expenditure?
You meaning additional expenditure just on Rotorua or in general?
Well, are we saying that the 4,500 that you're talking about in the Rotorua scheme, which contributes to the
4.5 million.
Sorry, 4.5 million. I'm with you now.
4.5 million, yeah.
Yep.
The hope was 4,500.
Is subject to a subsidy which has been delayed till next term.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the expenditure that's been incurred on that scheme so far, the expenditure that relates to that subsidy and our ability to claim that subsidy is currently underway and will fall due in the next financial year, at which point we can claim that subsidy.
So if the subsidy was 4.5 million, that would bring the subsidies in balance. You would still be 4.5 million over budget and expenditure. So that would be related to something else?
And correct, and that's as the report highlights that, and my presentation highlighted that's related in the main to the eyesight, the timing of the eyesight, the library, and that inner city work that was delayed, particularly for weather events. Yep.
Separate.
Correct, that is correct.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
Just a point of clarification through you, Mr. Chair. Thomas, you're saying the subsidy for Rotorua will come in next year. Are you talking about this current financial year, the next year after the report?
Correct, which is today, because we are in the new financial year now.
Yep.
So which is why in 2018 we won't receive the subsidy financial year, and in 2019, the one we're currently in now, even though I'm talking about the previous one, is when we will receive it. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I was going to say another 12 months delay, so I'm glad you clarified that. Councillor Kent, followed by Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like, first of all, to repeat my question to the Chief Executive from the month before last. Operating expenses and staff expenses between them are still tracking at an excess of $4 million ahead of budget. What does he intend to do about it? Because there's nothing in terms of capital expenditure within those figures. There's nothing with respect to capital subsidies in those figures. And basically, that's the $4 million that we're behind. That's my first question.
So sorry, that's incorrect. So from an operating perspective, it is 2.4 million behind, because while the expenditure...
Excuse me, it is 4,041,000 behind from your own figures on page 12.
So just to clarify that...
Councillor King, can you please ask the staff with due respect to answer the question? Mr. Colley?
So just to, while we've explained this a number of times, Councillor Kent, is that while that expenditure is, as you say, that figure, it is being offset by a significantly additional revenue. So from an operating perspective, it is contributing at about $2.5 million deficit. So I just wanted to clarify that.
So, Mr. Colley, on that particular line, Councillor Kent is correct. However, when you look at the complete picture, which you say at the bottom of page 12, we're 2.432 million, taking into account all other factors.
And I'll remind the council then, I'm sorry, I'm speaking for my boss, but I'll remind the councillor of probably 3 or 4 months ago when we highlighted these issues, and we talked about the fact that we were experiencing cost pressures and of those things that we've talked about before, electricity and waste and storms and those sorts of elements, and we put forward a mitigation plan with regards to reducing all of it, but there was also an acceptance that we couldn't fully offset it. And while we were targeting to pull the overall net deficit, which in the report says 2.4 million, back to 1, because of those storm events that we experienced and because of the Nongataha flooding, we couldn't have. And therefore that is the position that we're currently in.
Okay, Councillor Bentley.
Mr. Chairman, I have
Oh, sorry,
finished.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I dispute that. And I dispute it on the basis that the operating expenses and staff expenses are shown here at a variance of 4,041,000. There is nothing in the figures above that offsets that and brings it down to 2.5 million. The 2.5 million you're talking about at the bottom is after you've received an extra over forecast of 758,000 in rates. You've received an extra 560,000 improvement in finance charges. That's what's bringing it down. Nothing to do with the operating expenses and staff expenses. And these continue at 4 million over budget. And my question is to the Chief Executive, what does he intend to do about it, please?
Well, as Chair, I think to reflect what Mr. Colley has already said, because of the factors on page 13, that is the reason why the operating and staff expenses are higher, because of storms, of all these other mitigating issues that Mr. Colley, as a prudent professional, has to take account of and reflect it on page 12.
But Mr. Chairman, on page 13...
Councillor Kent, you've had your say. I'm not disputing the fact that the operating expenses and staff expenses have increased. Mr. Colley has explained that. These are the reasons why. If you've got anything further, Mr. Williams, to add?
Through the chair. So there's a number of different situations operating in here. So if we take our consents division or our regulatory divisions as good examples, what you see happening is we have actually had to put on increased staff in those divisions to cope with the demand that is actually coming through. And that's reflected in an increased cost. But on the other side of the equation, you've actually also got an increase in fees and charges, which is actually offsetting the costs that are going into those divisions. So that is also a pattern that is in other parts of the organisation at the same time. However, we've also got a number of different situations occurring at the moment. Some of them are all around floods and emergency events where we actually have brought in additional staff to actually cope with some of the challenges that have actually been in the organisation. But also we've got issues such as the museum building, as an example, where there is a lot of work currently going on in behind the scenes with regards to making sure that some of our big projects are able to actually move forward at a rate that I think you would expect them to see. And so some of that activity also brings additional cost into the organisation. So I think beyond what the Chief Financial Officer has already commented on, the summary number has in behind it a number of different scenarios which actually drive that outcome. If you're also asking the question, what are we doing in the future, I'd remind you that there is actually a work plan within the organisation that we're working to look at actually driving increased efficiencies in an ongoing way, and that's where we're looking at projects such as the work around the parking services. We're looking at the way in which we're managing in the future potentially our engineering services at the same time. So it's those activities that are looking to try and to make sure that our overheads with respect to staffing costs are actually as low as they can be, but also at the same time we can't predict what demand does to us. So the consenting division is probably the one that the moment most of our managers are extremely concerned by, because we have got an unprecedented number of consents and requests coming through that division, and quite simply the only way of addressing that is through increased staffing.
Thank you. Councillor Kent, your response?
Thank you. I accept the explanation from the Chief Executive as to what he intends to do in the future. I still think, from a councillor's perspective of viewing these figures, that more needs to be done and would advise caution. I now move on to the topic of moving sort of capital expenditure and subsidies. And to my mind, we've got here 5 million in capital subsidies that has moved and won't be recognised in this year. And we've also got 2 million in basic subsidies that was for the health hub that was shunted into last year to try and bring the end of year figures down. I again bring up the topic of if we do our budgeting based on capital subsidies coming in specific times, we are going to have this problem all the time.
You've been reading my mail, Councillor Kent, because that's the exact question I asked staff when we had the run through the other day. But Mr. Colley, would you like to repeat the answer you gave me regarding the health hub and whether we can mitigate some of these timing issues that Councillor Kent is highlighting?
Yeah, so Councillor, rest assured, we don't shunt subsidies around to manipulate financial results. We are bound to obviously reflect them when they fall due, and sometimes therefore we have to live with these sorts of circumstances. So.
Okay. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Williams.
Council, if I can make one comment with regards to this, we've also got to be very careful not to take the view that every year is a new year. And the key point of our long-term plan and our 10-year debt profile is to actually take a 10-year position on where we expect to see debt trending towards. And so there will be, absolutely, there will always be movements when you've got a large number of very big projects underway. There will be changes within those that means that you do get some unusual results across financial years. But the key thing to focus on is are we seeing, as a result of a movement across financial years, a movement away from our 10-year sustainable debt position? That's actually the key focus area. With regards to this report that has actually been put before you, I think already it was ascertained. I think the chair pointed out the fact that the capital subsidies will actually happen, but they just won't happen in the year that we thought that they would happen in, but they will happen, and therefore that will actually bring back an offset expenditure in the next financial year, which we didn't actually project it would.
Sure. Councillor Bentley. Oh, Councillor Kent.
Thank you.
I think it's fair that you be...
Thank you for that explanation. Then I assume from that since $5 million of capital subsidies that we're expecting this year isn't going to happen next year, then next year we can expect an end result $5 million under budget. Is that correct?
It would be lovely.
If I hadn't already taken into account those subsidies coming in into this next year's budget, that would have been the case, but unfortunately now we'll just achieve budget.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Thomas, for your presentation. With the unexpected and continuing costs caused by extreme weather events, what reserves has Council got or have been made for future months and years? That's the first question.
You're talking about it like a contingency fund. Mr. Colley?
Look, we haven't obviously allowed for a provision or a creation of an emergency reserve, if that's the sort of stuff that you're referring to. We obviously have, with regards to the unknown, taken a very prudent financial approach of our financial strategy that if required to increase borrowings to deal with these sorts of events that we can, and so going forward even into the next 10-year plan we do have sufficient buffer from that. I think from an operating perspective though, if you look at the new long-term plan, in particular the amount of expenditure going into stormwater and into sewage, we are looking to rectify a lot of the issues that are probably being caused. So there's a big focus on stormwater network improvements, and there's a big focus on water infiltration into the sewer network as well, and those sorts of events. But obviously from a roading perspective and some of that other infrastructure, we are reliant on other parties like NZTA to help us navigate through those issues when they arise.
Thank you. And my second question pertains to the cost of electricity. Yes. Given that New Zealand at the moment is experiencing one of its wettest years on record, so lake levels and so forth are extremely high, and yet electricity is also extremely high, and normally when you've got high lake levels your electricity costs drop. So if we're being hit in the pocket now, when I suggest we may have to revise our electricity budget somewhat in the future.
Yeah, so our budgeting next year has allowed for, I think, a bit of a buffer from memory, 10-15% additional on what we previously budgeted. I think it's an interesting one that at the start of the financial year we were talking about electricity and the price was double what we normally paid, but the usage was fairly similar, though we had a couple of spikes. And the reason why it was double what we usually paid was because while we were wet, the South Island and where those big hydro lakes weren't, and so they weren't at the levels that they needed to be. And they really didn't fill up until probably that ex-cyclone that came through in February that hit the South Island fairly hard, and it was at that point that we saw prices stabilise, but unfortunately we got very wet and therefore our volume or our usage increased, and so while the prices came down in the second half, our usage went up. So we're kind of stung by two different scenarios in 1 year, which is something that we haven't experienced for quite some time.
Thank you. This was a question I also asked Councillor Bendick. To be quite frank, how on earth can, if we've got a blowout of 751,000, how on earth can people on no incomes and fixed incomes budget their electricity usage? I actually think the Minister of Energy should be made aware of a 10 to 15% variation that you talked about earlier, should be made aware of what the ratepayers of Rotorua, and I think it would be up and down the country, are facing, and how hopeless it is to try and budget. I mean, that $751,000 we didn't budget for, so we either have to borrow it and fund it by debt servicing, or increase rates to cover it, and we've allowed increases in the budget, as you've said, Mr. Colley. So I think maybe a letter, Your Worship, from you to the Minister of Energy, advising them of what is going on. I mean, we're trying to get the best procurement, spot rates, etc., but no household budget could be able to put up with that. Can you like to comment, Mr. Colley?
So I think, just remember though, for most of us in households we have fixed pricing, and so therefore those pricing fluctuations that we are experiencing, we don't experience in our own personal circumstances because we've got fixed rates. This organisation elected many years to move away from that, and the reason for that was that we got significant savings in the long term by moving to the spot rate, and it was something like 20% on average we would be paying less. For most of the years that we've done this, we've actually been on the winning side. And so just remember that. It is 1 year where two perfect storms, if I use a bad pun, came together to cause the problem. But overall, over the life of what we've done, we are still significantly ahead of where we would have been with regards to payments for electricity, except it's just fallen due in obviously one financial year.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Then Councillor Maxwell.
Just in context, I think your request that we let ministers know, the top issue that Local Government New Zealand is discussing at the conference is funding tools for councils. We're not alone, actually, in finding funding pressures that actually you can't just keep putting rates up to meet, or fees and charges. So that's the top issue we're discussing next week at conference. And it's lovely to hear Councillor Bentley acknowledge climate change is real, because this year has not been business as usual for this council. And we're in the 11th month and we're seeing the impact. This has been a phenomenal year of disjunction. Who expected Chimpact to be closed, the museum to be closed? How do you think, as councillors, we managed to get that funding for the Provincial Growth Fund deposit? Work by councillors. All work, other work than business as usual, to attract partnership funding in to help us with our current funding tools, which are really limiting. And I think this just shows me and all of us that month by month looking at this is never, ever going to give us the answers that we want. And it is the 10-year LTP discussion that we ought to be very vigilant on to make sure that our debt levels are right, that we've still got the headroom, our debt to borrowing ratio is right. Very difficult today. I think this has been one of the hardest years this council's ever had. And I don't think the position will improve next month either. And it's not Finance Department's fault that adverse weather events meant the eye centre couldn't come in on time, that the library wasn't on time. It was weather. And if we don't face climate change as a council and deal with that appropriately, and then pressuring for other assistance on funding tools, as a council we'll just keep seeing an incremental rise in debt and an inability to charge our ratepayers more. It's very, very clear, and more clear now that we're in the 11th month of a very, very challenging year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for me, there's a small paragraph on the top of page 15. So, Mr. Colley, regarding the completion of the Library Health Hub, it's in brackets there. Is that telling me the whole project total budget came $600,000 under? Is that a saving we made, or that's what?
Oh, correct. I think the budget was 12.8, and I think it came in at 12.2 in total.
That isn't what it cost the ratepayers.
JP, was it 12.8 library?
But we didn't borrow 12.3.
No.
There were other subsidies.
Yes, correct. Yep.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Okawa, take finally, and we'll move the motion.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just that something that Her Worship just talked about the challenging year, and of course it has been a challenging year. But I just think that's going to be ongoing. I think that we're living in times where the business climate is changing, weather events. And it's just the unknown, and we don't know. I mean, heaven forbid this building could burn down. I'm not suggesting certainly not suggesting that, but I mean, we're living in a disruptive business environment, and we just have to understand that we're going to have these pressures. This challenging year is probably going to be ongoing, and it's just something that we have to factor in. I agree with Councillor Bentley. It would be nice to know that we've got some reserve, no matter how minor, how small, if we can look at that. But the challenge is going to be ongoing. I've got no doubt about that. I just wanted to say I support what the Mayor was saying. Difficult year, but I do believe we haven't seen the last of it in terms of this is the environment in which we're all operating. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Okawa Tate, in reply to you, we used to have what we used to call jam jars, which were contingency for events. But of course, to fill a jam jar, you either have to charge your ratepayers or increase debt. So we took the risk, didn't we, Thomas, that when an event occurs, we have got a buffer to borrow in an emergency situation, and that's the strategy that we have taken.
That's correct. Yeah. As
per our LTP, is that very right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, Mr. Williams.
So councillors, if I can just give you some assurance, on one angle you're quite right in assuming that the strategy is to ensure a prudent level of headroom of debt availability to actually respond to emergency situations. True. That's an absolutely essential strategy that we've got into place, and the treasury function of the organisation manages our debt profile to ensure that that is available. Second point that I'd make is that as an organisation, we're also, and you could see it in the last flood events, have developed quite a high level of resilience. We were able to reallocate 94 or so staff to deal with the flood events without disrupting business as usual operation. Now that's a significant achievement, and I think speaks volumes for the ability of the organisation to manage work and to manage priorities in a way that business continuity occurs, but we do respond to emergency situations. Now, we are working to actually even further our ability in this area, and how we're doing that is actually the development of partnerships with outside agencies, so that we can call in partner assistance at an even greater level than what we can at the moment. I think you're correct that the concept of resilience actually in the future is going to be key, and that's exactly what we're working on developing today.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Councillor Donaldson, finally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just asking for, and probably through you to Stavros, on page 13, the bullet point on domestic waste volumes at the landfilling. Reading the recovery reports from the Edgecombe inundation, they landfilled a tremendous amount of stuff that was ripped out of houses. I just wonder if how much the inundation at Nongataha has contributed to those landfill volumes.
Maybe we could ask Stavros when he... Oh, he's here. Stavros, is there any major impact as per the question?
Through you, Mr. Chair, during the May period, we queued about $200,000 additional cost of waste in a collection system, and a large chunk of that related to debris and collection systems. A lot of the people were insured, but in the meantime, we have to carry out that removal until the insurance companies come into play.
Thank you. Good question. So, do I have a mover? That the report entitled Financial Performance for the 11 months ended 31st of May 2018 be received. Move Councillor Donaldson, seconded Mr. Martin. Any further questions? All those in favour please say aye. Against, carried. Now, councillors, you will have in front of you, you go back to the minutes, a request came through this particular report, moved Councillor Donaldson, seconded Mayor Chadwick, that an itemised list of legal and other costs incurred to Council by Mr. McPherson's actions be provided to Council. A copy of that report has just been circulated to you. Who's going to take us through this report? Craig? Welcome, Craig. Thank you for your hard work in putting this together.
So I suppose we'll take the detail as what's in the report, but it's probably the covering memo that may help councillors understand the detail that's in behind here. So back in the last O&M meeting, we were asked to go and work out if we could quantify any costs that we'd been incurring as an organisation. And essentially, going back through all the documentation we could find in our organisation, because we don't keep records, where we account for every 15 minutes of officers' time and that sort of thing, and code it to different types of work. But using the staff's diaries, talking through people that were involved in the work, we've been able to make a guesstimate. So approximately 310 hours across the organisation, from the executive support level, those are the EAs, through to Jeff's time, have been involved as a guesstimate. And it is, while I say guesstimate, it's the best guesstimate we can make without really going into a forensic sort of detail. I think one of the important things to quantify is what it says, 190 pieces of work. That's relating to questions under the Lagoima Act all the way through to any inquiries or face-to-face meetings that were required with parties involved. So yeah, that's essentially the summary from that period. I'm hopeful that it satisfied the question that was given to us as officers.
So the best guesstimate is $237,336. Does that, Craig, include the costs of court appearances and
yeah,
all those?
that's a comprehensive total. So the staff costs we've allocated out as we would if we had to charge under the Local Government Act, and that's an approximate cost of $76 per hour. That is probably a low estimate, considering that some of this time would have been the Chief Executive's time, and
I wish my lawyer and accountant would charge me $76 an hour. That's for sure. Are there any comments, Your Worship?
Say thank you for this. I think this has been transparent, which we've always believed we should be. And that's for the public to decide, really. Is that the price of democracy? The other bit of this, though, that I worry about is the avoided subsidies that we didn't get for some sponsors and funders that were going to help us with events. They pulled the plug on sponsorship because of, letters and communication to them. That was a worry to me, that underrailed some things that we were hopeful would happen. But I just wanted, I didn't know what this would have cost. I'm not surprised, but the other aspect, I think, is this is all work that staff could have been getting on with the business of council, that was diverted over to constant requests for information and challenges. So that has, staff have been again diverted from wanting to get on with doing the business. But I thank you for the report, and I'm sorry that I'm glad I got it, and that we've got it tabled openly, and that would have taken you time too, staff. But it is important for the record to know. I'm amazed in my role at how much information is required of council staff through Lagoimas and requests for information. It is ongoing and starting to be a cost to council. And it was that I really wanted put on the record. Thank you.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I note that over 50% of the requests here you're putting towards the costs incurred by Dr. McPherson are actually media requests, and I doubt whether Mr. McPherson has any control over what the media asks this council to provide information on. So that's one thing that I would like to get cleared up. The other thing is, I know how easy it is for our Chief Executive to rush out and get legal advice with regard to what councillors are doing. And I think this is...
Sorry, I'm not clear what you're saying. What are you saying, Councillor Bentley? I'm
saying that a lot of the stuff in here
is
media requests.
Yes.
It's nothing to do with Mr. McPherson.
Okay. Ms. Craig, would you like to respond?
Yeah, so these aren't all the media requests we get. These are the media requests that have been generated from a press release that's come out from Mr. McPherson on behalf of his group, and then has generated us to have to respond to the information that Mr. McPherson has put out in public. Media. Yeah. Okay. So they're a direct response to his media request, and then the media comes to us and says, Mr. McPherson has said X, how do you respond? Yeah.
And we have to either correct it or respond accordingly. Mr. Williams, you have a comment?
Look, if I can also actually make a comment with regards to the seeking of legal advice. Legal advice is not sought by this organisation lightly. We consider very carefully the costs of seeking legal advice against the potential risk the organisation faces as a result of complaints and other other actions which are actually taken. You'll note that, in fact, all of the complaints that have been laid to date, for example, have not actually been upheld, and that is because of the thorough and complete manner in which these have been responded to, which cannot happen without actually the use of prudent legal advice.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Craig, for your memorandum. And my point just smells dirty, and I think this is just a witch hunt and vendetta to weaken a democratic right to challenge the issues that someone is seeking. What are we trying to prove over here? That is my question.
Well, I don't think staff should be in a position to answer that. The request.
I
No, point of order. Thank you, Your Worship. It was raised at a council meeting, which you requested that your vote be recorded against, that an itemised list of legal and other costs incurred to council by Mr McPherson's actions be provided to council. It came up in a general discussion in response to the report from the Office of the Auditor General, which Mr McPherson raised some issues with in terms of whether council should be paying legal fees for this, that and the other. The Auditor General came out and supported council in terms of being a prudent employer, that we did pay those electoral costs. So in the discussion at that meeting, as I said, it was moved that there was general concern around the table, except from some quarters, that Mr McPherson's actions were costing the ratepayers a lot of money, and we wanted that quantified to a best guess estimate. I actually think it's a very conservative estimate. So, Councillor Kumar, do you have any other matters you want to raise?
Yeah, my point is that today is Dr. McPherson. Tomorrow will be another Mr. McPherson questioning through Logoima, challenging us, their democratic right to the way we operate. And that's their democratic right.
It is. I think the Court of Public Opinion will be the best judge.
Thank you.
Would someone like to move the report be received? Your Worship, seconded Councillor Donaldson. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We'll release that to the public and the media. Sure, yeah, yeah, we're going to give you a copy, not a problem. Right, the next item is recommendation 1, financial performance, we've done. Recommendation 2 on page 16 in your agendas. Before we move there, I'd like to call on Joe Doherty and Tamiona to come forward. If you'd like to go to the front desk. I thought it really important that we all like to enjoy and celebrate success, and for these two individuals who run the night market to win the award at the Hospitality Awards the other night is a huge feather in your cap. There's the award there, and welcome Joe and Tamiona. If you'd like to make any comments with regard to it, I know you're probably going to say it's a team effort, but it is one special part of Rotorua's experience, so I'll leave it open to you. Thank you.
Kia ora, thanks Councillor Sturt. Just really on behalf of the whole team at the night market, it is a team effort, but particularly, I guess, Bridget Nelson, who's not here and wasn't able to attend the awards on Sunday night. She's been involved with the night market right from the start. Tani Ora is our main man, organising the crews, organising the stall holders every week in, week out, right throughout the winter. So the award was up against Crankworks and the Orkiri Falls Beer Fest, both of which are also fantastic events in the city. So for the night market to take it out this year was really, really special. So big ups to Tani Ora here, and also Bridget and the rest of the team, and our stall holders, I guess, and all the community comes and supports it every week. It really is a big team effort.
Kia ora tātou. Yeah, just a big thank you. I really wasn't expecting this award. We're up against some big players, and I am just a little cog in this massive machine. You know, there's a lot of people involved in the market. And it is good to be recognised because we do work hard, and there's just a lot of people involved. So even though I'd rather not be recognised, I'd rather just work and get on with it. It is a nice feeling. Thank you.
Your Worship.
Well, I had the pleasure of being at the awards, and so was Deputy Mayor for Crankworks, I think, but it was hugely well received by the audience that night, and that's a real tribute to something that is now sustainable. And when we started it, we didn't know how it would go. It was worth trying, Now it's on the calendar for Rotorua, and everybody around the floor that night was genuinely really thrilled, and I was quite excited by it, and I congratulate you. We see every Thursday, you and your team, Taniora, getting everybody out. We see the queen of the market, Bridget Nelson. She knows everybody there. Yeah, she works out their needs and their, you know, and accommodates them. And I hear now from the wider region that this is a date on the map for lots of people. If they're going to come to Rotorua, they come on Thursday so they can go to the night market. And that's exactly what we wanted to achieve, but it was nice to hear the people so excited. So congratulations from us, and we're all very proud too, because the markets sometimes are seen as, you know, something that we may not need. But now you've shown us that this is something that's part of Rotorua and a great product. So thank you for your team and your contribution.
Councillor
And I had to be quiet on the night. Couldn't say anything.
You didn't jump up and go, yee-haw.
I did.
I bet you did. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Also acknowledge the team for an amazing event, and Crankworks is delighted to come second or third on this occasion. But the thing about the hospitality awards is they're completely unsolicited. You don't enter them. So, you know, the team have a right to be humble, because you are actually nominated by the industry and voted on by the industry. And so you haven't put an application together, you haven't pumped yourself up. It's completely unsolicited, and it's fantastic acknowledgement. So I congratulate them as well.
Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, my congratulations on receiving this award. It's well done. But looking to the future, do you have any plans to actually turn a profit on this market?
Joe.
The night market itself actually is pretty close to breaking even. Correct. So we've just attracted 3 years more sponsorship from Unison. Yes. The stall holders are, you know, steady. We've just increased the fees for the first time in 6 years of the night market running. So our expectation is that the night market itself will be pretty much break even from this point on.
Thank you very much, Joe, for that. That's encouraging news. Any other comments? I'd like to move, and I'm sure Her Worship will second, that congratulations go to the staff involved in the Rotorua Night Market, and we wish you well in the future. If you'd just like to pass it around so councillors can have a look. And thank you for attending this morning, and good luck for tonight. Thank you. Right, we'll turn to page 16, the operations report for April to June. Would someone like to move that the report... Oh, okay. We haven't got to it yet. That the operations report for April to June 2018 be received. Moved Councillor Maxwell, seconded Councillor Kawate. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. What we'll do is we'll go through them one by one. Have you got an overarching comment you want to make, Councillor Maxwell? Or yes, the Mayor's office. I don't think it's come to us for approval. I think it's come with the graciousness of Her Worship, just advising some of the things that she's involved in, and you know, to be asked to speak on those particular three topics is just amazing. Yes. Oh, publicly. Yeah, okay. Your wish. Point taken. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Your wish.
This is out of the blue, but I actually think it reflects our vision. And it was a phone call from the Argentinian embassy to say that they chose Rotorua. And they chose us because of our cultural tourism centre to what we are, sustainability, and also emerging and sustainable cities. And the ambassador said there is only one that should go from New Zealand to represent New Zealand, and that was amazing. I'm happy for it to come here. I think I've always said we've got to be transparent, and I didn't think we'd get there, but I want to acknowledge Air New Zealand, and their support came because they said the three key objectives of the conference are Air New Zealand's objectives, and they've started the Buenos Aires flight, and so I dare say I'll be put to a bit of work over there with promotion of New Zealand. So I think it's wonderful for us all. I wished, you know, you could take something to reflect.
If you want a valet, I'm more than happy to
Yeah,
volunteer.
I know. But no, we should bring them here. I get a bit hoity-toity at times about what we have to bring, but I agree with the staff. No, put it out there in the public, and then you can't be criticised.
Thank you. The Kaiwhakahaere Māori report. Monty. Oh, sorry. You.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was going to say Your Worship, Councillor Kawate.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I just want to comment on something that, and thank you for this. It's a wonderful opportunity to go over and you know, relationships start with actually getting there and talking to people, either here or overseas. But it's something that Councillor Maxwell did bring up, and this is around the invitations to our mayor to travel, and particularly to international events and conferences, which I actually support. And I would like to think at some stage we're going to look at the policy around the mayoral travel overseas, because there will always be people who say it's not necessary, and they take a small, minute view of travel and the benefits that come back. And you know, I just would not like to think, and I suspect that from time to time this has happened, that the mayor has put aside invitations for international travel because she thought she might come under fire. That I don't believe is a reason not to entertain looking very seriously, Your Worship, at some of these invitations that are coming to you, and the opportunity for us to be represented. We never know what might come of some of these things, but we certainly won't know if we're never there and not accepting the invitation. So I find it a little disconcerting that you always have to come like cap in hand to say, you know, will you approve the counts? I think we should be looking at that policy at some stage in the future and do away with it altogether. Because if we feel it's a flippant junket experience, then councillors will definitely let you know. So I just think that's an opportunity for us to grow up a bit and look at that policy in its entirety at some stage in the future.
I hear what you're saying, Councillor Kawate. It actually concerns me. I mean, any one of us in this room, when you travel, it costs you money, whether the airfares are paid for, the accommodation are paid for. There are out-of-pocket expenses, and the Mayor would never ever raise this herself. But I agree with you, Councillor Kawate, that there needs to be a review. We've got a pretty stringent policy in terms of overseas travel, but the costs associated with it, I don't think are compensated adequately, because this is a feather in Rotorua's cap, not New Zealand's. Rotorua's cap, because of the work that we've been doing through our LTP, through our spatial planning, through all the other costs that our ratepayers have had to sustain. And whilst this is definitely not a junket, and I agree with you, there's enough of us around this table who would say, hey, what are you off on now, you know, sort of thing, and that's happened in the past too. So I think maybe Mr Chief Executive, a review of that, take it out of the Mayor's court. It's not her kaupapa, it's our kaupapa in terms of supporting our mayor and, as you say, your worship, in terms of reflecting our vision. People want to talk to you as leader of this community on those matters, and we wish you well in your trip. Okay, we'll move to the Kai Whakahaere Māori. Monty Morrison and Gina are away. We'll take it as read unless there are any questions. Yes, your worship.
Just make a comment that the opening of the Rotorua playground was really absolutely delightful. And for those that wonder what that's all about, it's at Teletubbies Hill and Taikaka, and it's very beautiful. And go down there if we're not comfortable with the reo and you'll hear it being spoken and you hear it from the children, and you have a go. And it's a lovely space, and I congratulate the team. I was well aware that before the Tall Blacks game, they worked almost through the night to get it done in time, and well done to our partners, Te Tatou or Te Arawa, fabulous, and the interactive digital tool. I'll tell you, I was the best grandmother when I could show them all that I knew how to work it. It's really a lovely space. I hear there's been some people worried about it, but goodness me, just go down and sit amongst the children, and you'll realise how rich the language is. So well done to the staff who got it done, and to Tato for your idea.
Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I totally agree with the bilingual signage, but I have a concern at the rugby stadium is that the car parks are actually in Māori totally, with a yellow sign saying kōwhai. People are colourblind, and sometimes they can't pick up the colours in relation to their cards. So if you're going to put kōwhai for yellow, you probably have to put yellow in small words underneath it. Just a suggestion. It's got to be bilingual. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, Kakariki Park. Yep. Good point. Okay, the next group is the strategy group with John Paul. Welcome, JP. JP, one of the things I was delighted with, and I know her worship, she's pretty humble in terms of that, but the second paragraph at the bottom of page 18, in May, Council made an application, the Provincial Growth Fund offered by MBIE, for funds to finalise the business case and detailed design of Stage 1 for the forest and lakefront projects. On the 29th of June, Parliamentary Under Secretary for Regional Economic Development, our local list MP Fletcher Tabito, announced $811,000 PGF grants to progress the business case, including design. Now this is, JP, I'm sure you want to comment on this, but this is reflective of a team effort of getting these issues and projects across the line. Yeah. Similar to what, on a lot smaller scale, but no less effective with the Rotorua Night Market, sort of a cog in the wheel. Yeah. JP, would you like to take us through your report and update any issues, particularly with the Sanatorium Reserve? I know I've had a couple of questions from councillors regarding that, what that is actually doing, and an update on Habitat New Zealand's intent with regard to the pensioner housing.
All right, thank you, Councillor. And I'm probably just starting back at the PGF announcement. Yes, it was a very cold morning on last Friday morning, and I think approximately 60 members of the public, council's partners around those projects, and officials and stakeholders attended that function that was called together by our local MP and Under Secretary Mr. Tabito. So yeah, it was a really nice step to receive that first part of that funding. Councillors, as you're aware, since we completed that refresh of Vision 2030, one of the big moves projects that we identified really to help transform the city and take it forward towards that vision was the lakefront and the Rotorua forest project. So,
can you say it properly? Whakarewa.
Sorry, Whakarewa Forest. Councillors, that's so this part was just to receive the funding, as you stated, to undertake the final pieces of the full applications. So we're expecting to complete those at the end of this month. So that's part of the economic analysis, but also moving the design phase from concept through to preliminary design. So on that basis, we've got some more accurate costings to support our applications. Councillors, as you are aware, you've put in the long-term plan approximately $20 million for the lakefront redevelopment as part of this project. So what we'll be seeking with this application that this funding supports is match funding through the Provincial Growth Fund, so $20 million for the lakefront, and match funding similarly for the forest public infrastructure as well of approximately $7.5 million.
So JP, when do you think those development proposals for the redwoods, I know people are excited about that, and the Whakarewa forest, when will they be available for public viewing?
The concept plan for the forest we've had attached to the long-term plan process. So if you recall, it builds on the work that was done almost 10 years ago by Rate and Associates as part of a project with Gifted Reserves and Te Arawa Lakes Trust, and that involved a fair amount of public consultation. So we're really working from that piece as the base. As we get closer to final plans, it's probably likely that we'll be able to show those to the public more widely in October and November. As far as the forest process is concerned, it's about enhancing the infrastructure that's already there and in support of the mana whenua and landowners for the forest, just starting to look at how we expand access into that forest area. So Long Mile is the key focus. So those plans will be available probably in October and November as well. So at this stage, we're hoping to get that application to MB and to government by early August. At that point, really, we just have to continue to work through the more detailed design work and wait with anticipation for a positive response from government funding. So councillors, that's kind of where we're up to on those key projects. The other piece of information there, and it goes on to page 19, was one of the important stakeholders or linkages we have on the lakefront is to Ohanimutu, the village. So there was a consultation Hui proposed as to how the lakefront links with Ohanimutu, proposed a few weeks ago. But unfortunately, because of the tangi, it's been postponed. So it's now going to occur this Sunday. So we're really expecting a good conversation about the sort of the impacts of visitors on the village and how the village needs to ensure it's protected or interfaces with what's happening as far as the plans.
And is that part of the linkages with the Sanatorium Reserve as well?
Yeah, and Councillor, that nicely segues into that. So as you're aware, the linkage of all of our projects together was important for us. So we're also looking at a new application for Te Araahi, so that's the cycleways. So that links the forest and the lakefront and round through Kurau Park and into our wider Skyway network. So what's being proposed here is, if you recall, we undertook a piece of work completed by Wildlands looking at vegetation restoration plan. Sanatorium Reserve is filled with exotics and weeds. So what is being proposed is a replanting and removal of the bamboo and the weeds in anticipation of us enhancing the tracks and the walkways through that reserve. So a really positive project as far as an environmental restoration is concerned. So we've received obviously that $85,000 worth of funding, so that's a piece of work we're going to continue with regardless of what else is happening around it. But yeah, a really positive response.
Any questions? Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question for JP, and thank you for your report, JP, was regarding the pensioner housing and your determination, if you like, to divest this council of that housing arrangement we have.
Yes, point of order, Your Worship.
It was not a council executive's decision, and it's not divestment of pensioner housing. So I would ask Councillor Bentley to withdraw that remark. We made that decision about how we will look at pensioner housing.
Yep. So we have not made that mark in the way. I hear what you're saying, Councillor Bentley. We haven't made the mark that we will divest.
Well,
So,
what I'm getting
Councillor
to,
Bentley?
what I'm getting to is that I think that we should be looking at the opposite thing and actually increasing pensioner housing, given that funding would be very well received from people like Bay Trust, who are looking at investing in exactly this type of business. And given that pensioner housing supposedly is cost neutral to council, we should be looking at servicing this for the lower income people that we have in our society that are reaching the end of their lives and deserve a little bit of a hand up and help.
Yeah, I think Councillor Bentley, there is general acceptance around the table that there is another point of view, and I agree with you. JP?
Through you, Mr. Chair, in answering the councillor's statements, it is that the points he's raised are incredibly valid. But if you recall, in our consultation and in the workshops we did leading through to going out for public consultation, we set a number of objectives for how we thought our pensioner or social housing stock should be treated. And that's been the basis of any of these conversations with external partners. And the first of those was that we have to have the stock to a really high standard. And that's a better standard than what we currently provide. We also have to see an increase in the numbers of units. We have 152 units, and we have had 152 units for a significant amount of time. The demand for those affordable and pensioner-orientated housing units is increasing as our population increases and our population ages. So those are two critical issues. The final set of objectives that we identified when we discussed the future of the pensioner housing stock was to say that a number of our tenants have more complicated needs than simply an affordable house or accommodation. And so we don't provide any of the wraparound social services that other providers can and do provide. So how did we see those going forward? So those were some of our key objectives to make sure that A, the stock grows, excellent condition, and there's a delivery of the social services that a number of those tenants need. So that's been our imperative in all of the conversations we've had about our own service level, or whether we consider going outside or partnering with other organisations. So the councillor is absolutely right. Bay Trust is committed to seeing improvements in affordable and social housing provision across the Bay of Plenty, and has funded directly low interest loans to community housing providers. So again, I'll come back around to the question that a community housing provider, so an entity with the sole purpose to provide that social housing, is eligible for a rent top-up, so that they can receive more money than the council can in providing it. So we're not eligible to become a community housing provider. So in the Bay of Plenty there's a number operating, in the Waikato there's a number operating as well. So they can receive a rent top-up from the government directly. Now that enables those community housing providers to expand the stock, keep them at better levels of condition, and to provide those wraparound social services with government support. And they're also, because of their professional approach and the controls that are set on them, they also attract investment from the philanthropic trusts like Bay Trust. So that's where a lot of the effort and the money has been directed. So at this stage, as you're aware, the transfer or sale across to a CHIP so that they could run them more effectively and grow them didn't go through, but we're still in discussions with one as to a potential way forward. But as this process goes through, it is absolutely clear that it would always come back to you to make an evaluation as to whether that is the right course of action to take. So these discussions are ongoing, but we'll always come back to you for your decision.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Bentley. There's others that want to make comment, but I'm pleased to hear what you just finished saying, JP, because certainly I haven't made a decision one way or t'other. And I have some considerable support with what Councillor Bentley's preferring. Not everyone can afford market rents, but these subsidies come and go, and that's the danger. Once it's up and running with these social housing providers, then the subsidies disappear, ends up the ratepayer ends up paying again. So I'm very hesitant about that sort of thing. Councillor Rotorua, then Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, thank you, JP. I think we've got to look at this perhaps in a new light. In the next 20 to 25 years, 80% of the people retiring will be renters. They will not own their own homes. So that means that, and they will be living solely off the national superannuation. And God knows what level that'll be at that time. So, you know, we really have to understand that we're going to be inheriting a situation, or it's coming towards us, that is going to have significant impact on older people living in our community. It could well be by that time, because I know this government is looking at community housing providers and looking again at council and to what they can do in this area. And we might be able to, at some stage in the future, get the rental top-up that currently goes to community housing providers and not to, council-owned rental accommodation. But I think that we have to look at it, and if we don't find a desirable community housing provider, then we might have to look at establishing one ourselves and actually getting out there and go. I mean, I know about 3 people in this community who actually have national experience in this work. You know, and they live here in Rotorua, and they have significant experience and would be able to drive a community housing provider entity into existence. Whether we want to go down that track, I don't know, but I do know that this is a big problem that we're going to have on our laps in a very short short time. So, and I wonder if we are actually scoping it as wide as we should. Bearing in mind what's coming down the pipeline to us. So I just want to signal it's not going to be an easy solution, and we have to think a little bit outside of the box in this regard. I've got big concerns for older people retiring in the next 15 to 20 years who will be renters, and how they're going to be able to have a quality of life that enables them to live their days out with some dignity and not be pushed hard up against the wall financially. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rotorua. Councillor Martin? Maxwell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and in all the previous workshops and previous meetings we've had, I've asked a couple of these questions because I'm observing and listening and waiting and listening to what's happening at the moment, and if we can get a better deal for our pensioner housing people than we have now with some of the subsidies and some of the top-ups, great, but I want to wait and see, and I'm happy that even Councillor Bentley's raising these concerns that we raised at the workshops, but also I'm also pleased to hear from you, JP, reassuring us how you're going down this path. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Mr. Maxwell. Mr. Martin?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Question to JP, please. Have we done a costing of the pensioner housing to bring them up to the standard? I don't want to figure, I just want to know, have we done any costings? Why I'm asking the question, Mr. Chairman, is because it refers to a substantially lower price for the Council of Pensioner Housing. And I was trying to strike somewhere where it's an acceptable cost, and it needs to be done in confidential.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think one of the things that we did was that, when we adjusted the LTP because the consultation didn't lead to a transfer, one of the things that Thomas had done, so Mr. Collet had done, was to ensure that he had started to increase the amount of money that was going into the renewals of the current units to try and make sure that those that were the most deficient were brought up to standard as quickly as possible. And obviously we have the new tenancy regulations and requirements put some of that onus onto us. So he has started to anticipate that. So whichever way council chooses to go, we are starting to build into the budget sufficient funding to lift this quality of the current stock. Not necessary to expand it, but to lift the quality of the current stock.
Thank you for the questions. I'd now like to move to page 22, the infrastructure group. Stavros has an urgent thing that he needs to attend shortly, so can we move to the infrastructure group on page 22? Stavros, and while you're walking up to make your presentation, I've got to congratulate you on the way in which you are reporting your capital projects. It's quite clear. There are some councillors have rung me, have seen me before the meeting. There are some concerns in terms of some of the outcomes that you're projecting, but if you'd like to highlight anything, we'd be more than happy to hear. Thank you and welcome, Stavros.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll take the report as read. I've got 4 or 5 items I would like to highlight, and I'll be, of course, ready to take any questions following from that. Firstly, with regards to our overall emergency response progression, I've listened to your conversations earlier with my colleague, the Chief Financial Officer. I think it's quite important to highlight that during the events we had over the last 12 months, and especially with the event on the end of April,
29th,
it is important for all of us to understand that while in terms of properties, roughly 1% of our district properties have been affected by these events, the reality is that the other 99% of our residents expect their regular water services, sewage services, stormwater services, access services, waste collections to take place. So while we are responding to these extreme events, and all we do is that we affect temporary traffic management, we remove slips, we're removing trees, we remove hazards from those areas, and we incur additional costs. Unfortunately, those costs are not offset by deferring other maintenance. These are costs that we incur over and above our normal maintenance, because, as I said earlier, the other 99% of the district have a right and an expectation that their normal services will continue to be incurred. Mr. Martin pointed out to me, some apparent discrepancy in some of our reporting, which, for example, we've said in some areas, like in Paradise Valley, some of the jobs are reported as completed. And I want to clarify that while the stabilization works have been completed in some areas, there are other additional works to be done in terms of barriers, in terms of signage, in terms of road markings, and so on. So this is work in progress, and unfortunately, this work in progress will be with us for at least the next 12 months. We've got at least $5.5 million of reinstatement works to take place, and unfortunately, the recent events in April have exacerbated some damages that have been incurred earlier in the year too. The other area that I wanted to highlight for you is that last week we had a significant workshop with NZTA and significant stakeholders with regards to the Eastern Corridor. And after a long process, I'm quite pleased to report that now there is no ambiguity and there is no debate that the 4-laning of the corridor between Isles Road and the airport, including a roundabout at the airport, it is the only viable and preferred option for that for that corridor. Having gone through a significant technical evaluation process where the technical consultants on NZTA have evaluated, as a report, over 130 different kind of options, now we all agree that the 4-laning and the associated works around that is the preferred option. The only question that remains at the moment is where that funding sits in the national priority for NZTA. We are already started taking steps to encourage NZTA to work with us to evaluate alternative options, funding options. For example, it might be possible that we take over that project with an enhanced NZTA subsidy funding. We're making an application to PGF for the additional funding for that, and hopefully over the next few months we'll be able to report to you progress in that direction, and hopefully we have workshop the mayor will make enough noise in the political environment to ensure that this is a critical project for our district in terms of socio-economic outcomes, removal of severance of the communities, improving safety, improving active motor transport, and most importantly unlocking the potential for land development in that area.
Excellent.
The other thing, the other area, project we are working at the moment, and again we're making significant project, is the revocation, progress is the revocation of the State Highway 38 from Tinai Road all the way to Old Tapo Road, Amo House Street, as you know it. There is an $11 million budget for NZTA to convert that road into a local arterial route. We have a number of steering meetings, which includes the commercial sector, the Pokerua Whata Trust, technical aspects and other stakeholders. And again, now have concluded to a large concept as to how that is going to look. And I would expect by January this year, the detailed design will be completed, ready for tender, to be able to achieve these significant improvements before we accept that corridor as part and parcel of our local network. And again, it's an $11 million investment that will ensure a significantly enhanced environment, safer environment for our active modes of transport, but will also make sure that we connect the Rotorua Central with the rest of the CBD, and the cost will be fully borne by the NZTA. The other area that I want to sort of give you a quick appraise is that on the 13th of July, the request for proposals for the procurement plan for our wastewater services will be delivered by the two shortlisted consortia. As you would recall, we have been reporting progress on that for the last 8 or 9 months. We are now at the stage where the final proposals will be reported to us. And following from that an evaluation, we hope to be able to come back to you with a recommendation around late September as to what our preferred recommendation would be. I would like to give you comfort and assurance that in those processes and workings, we're aiming to achieve, as my Chief Executive said earlier, long-term sustainability of our resources, in-depth availability of skills and expertise, external funding for some of our capital upgrades, to at least to offset some immediate need to borrow, but obviously we will continue to have that as our asset under our control. But more importantly is to put our system in a way that is going to be more resilient for the future. We are including unions in that, including staff, and we are working collaboratively with Tiaroa Collective to become a partner into that project. And again, we hope by September, October to be able to report to you and with some recommendation. Also, just to signal to you that over the next 3 or 4 months, we'll come back to you with some procurement recommendations with regards to conversion of our street lights, 5,500 of them to LED. Initially, we've been working through an external party, and recently we have secured from NZTA an agreement to fund 85% of the capital cost of that, with the other 15% to be funded by another party, and we amortize it over long-term contracts. So again, we'll be able to report to you by the end of October, a recommendation in that direction. And of course, our expectation for that is that, converting our lights to LED will reduce significantly our maintenance costs, but more importantly, we expect to reduce our energy consumption to about 50% of what it is at the moment. Another piece of work we're working at the moment, as you're aware, we've got in the district a significant number of bus shelters. Some of them are in poor condition. And again, we're going to the market and asking the market to provide offers to upgrade, replace these bus shelters, more suitable shelters for the community, in a way that is going to be funding, installing, operating, and maintaining those shelters, for the long-term future. And again, we will expect to come back to you over the next few months with some recommendations, in that respect.
And finally, our active mode of transport is highway, and that's the purpose of this presentation. If you got on board, on your screens there too, as we are implementing our walking and cycling share paths, I'm sure some of you would have received some concerns by some people with regards to the way we're treating key intersections, especially when we go down to Ranulph Street. And now I intended to give you a very quick presentation as to the rationale why we're treating these intersections in that respect. Primarily, we are enhancing our cycling and walking networks because we want to achieve a number of objectives. One of these objectives is actually to encourage young people to go from home to schools, either walking or cycling. The outcome of that, we've got 15,000 6-year-old to 18-year-old who goes to school. The vast majority of them are being dropped to school by cars. Yes. That has got significant disbenefits. One is that creates congestion around schools in early morning. It reduces the health benefits for our young people. It encourages air pollution and so on. The information we get from parents and the children is that we go by car because we don't think we have safe corridors to get to these kind of schools. And we're trying to create these kind of corridors. In the process of doing that, we have to treat intersections in a way that will give a prejudice preference in favor of the safety of these people who are using walking and cycling. And we are, excuse me, I'm not sure if you can use that. See there, in some areas like this typical intersection here, you will see, if this is Ranulph Street, for example, Ranulph Street, we're projecting the curbing in onto the road. And the reason for that is that if you're a pedestrian and a cyclist wanting to cross on that side road there, you don't want to face a speeding car zooming around the corner and finding you crossing the road. So we're creating these curb extensions to do two things: to compel drivers to take a second look as they turn the corner, to slow down, but also we're creating that storage space there. So if a person is using that corridor, that pedestrian corridor there, the vehicle has got a space to stop and allow the pedestrian to cross without having the pressure of traffic behind them pressuring to take the corner at a speed. And again, these are the built out. It's a purpose which outlines the rationale for that. And as you said, this is that's kind of significant sort of steps that will achieve the benefit of giving the perception and encouraging young people and older people and anyone who wants to walk or cycle to go to destinations in a way that is safer. And you can see sort of got some of these examples here. That's got to do with pushing the curb out. We're having a parking on the side, which basically creates an enclave for parking. A coming vehicle on the left-hand side going to turn left. It's got enough space to stop there to allow them to cross safely. And to some degree, we're getting complaints or some inquiries from people to say, "Oh, we don't understand why you're creating curb extensions here." The reason for that, it's twofold: slow them down, compel them to take a second look, and allowing a pedestrian, a child, a cyclist, a person on a disability scooter to cross safely there. So I think it's quite important for you to be aware of that, because no doubt some people will come to you and ask questions, and I think the more informed you are, the more champions you'll be on that project. Thank you very much. Take questions.
Thank you, Stavros. Just one other question I've got on the page. Top of page 25 is the rural seal extension. I understand why Mangamingi Road was deferred for 2018-19, but I've had a number of rural people. We normally signal every 3 years what our program is. So could we have that updated the next round, please?
Yeah, sure, you can have that. Also, it's quite important, Mr. Chair, to highlight that we are working with the Rural Community Board, and the priority list is communicated to the Community Board, so we'll do our best to adhere to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kent and Councillor Kumar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. Stavros, just looking at that picture that you've got up there, it looks to me as if you're giving right of way to the cyclists over vehicles. Pedestrians have a right of way if they're on a crossing. What is the legal circumstance with cyclists crossing the road in this case? Surely they should be giving way to cars, and that's not what that projects.
True.
Councillor Kent, this is a demonstration picture you've got in front of you. Every intersection will be treated in a slightly different way for that. However, where there is a pedestrian crossing, as you rightly said, pedestrians or dismounted cyclists, have the priority. In areas where there is not a formal pedestrian crossing, we have what we call courtesy crossings. And although in strict legal terms, they don't have the priority, we're actually creating the engineered environment conditions so as a driver to take a second look, to be cautious and take approach. But you are quite right. If there is no pedestrian crossing there, and the cyclist, was to go straight through, and obviously they need to be aware and need to be careful to gauge, the movement of vehicles so they don't conflict with the movement of vehicles. And where we will install pedestrian crossings, obviously, we would expect and encourage cyclists to dismount and walk through that pedestrian crossing.
Councillor Kumar.
Thank you. Well, just looking at the photograph, as you see there, if you've got a continuous green going straight across the road, that indicates to a cyclist that they have the right of way and away they go. There is nothing there to indicate that they should stop, dismount, or anything else. So I think that needs to be looked at quite carefully.
You're quite right. As I said, this is just a demonstration of piece of, of photo, but it will not necessarily be the same everywhere. Thank you.
Councillor Kumar, then the Mayor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Stavros, for your detailed explanation. I think a lot of confusion was coming up in the Renoff Street area with what all those bulges were, and that's what all the questions were for. And I think that today answers the question. My question is, if there could be, is there a way of letting the public know through the media, or somehow some way what all these intersections are all about, and why we bring the cycleways and all? Because people seem to think that nobody's riding them, and they're getting frustrated. But we really need to educate the people to let them know, hey, look, residents of Rotorua, this is the future of where we're heading, and this is why this curbing, this cycleways are all coming as well. And if I can put my dry joke cap on, I hope she receives a $30 fine for not wearing a helmet there.
They don't wear helmets, though.
Oh.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Kumar. Yeah, you are absolutely right. In conjunction with the obviously engineering interventions, we need to in parallel follow with educational programs and information programs. Thank you.
Yeah, just echoing what Councillor Kumar is saying, Stavros, maybe a bulletin board outside Greenholme School. That's where the issues in terms of people understanding what are you doing, cutting out our parking, etc. comments that we're having. So I think we've got a bit of a PR job to do there. So are there any other questions? Mr. Stanton, sorry, the Mayor, sorry.
Stavros, I'd love you to be able to give us the figures for the uptake and the increase in cycling. This certainly was an issue that came to many of us, and people hadn't seen that the road markings were in place either, so there was some fear that they were going from 2 lanes to 1. So there has been a little bit of confusion. So an uptake in the cycling figures, and the other one was, I like the idea around marketing this a bit more. And when we opened the Ranulph Street cycleway by the hospital, it was fabulous to be able to sort of go for a bit of a walk or a ride and just experience it. So we could do something like that to socialise what the change is going to be on those users.
Mayor Chadwick, they remember that we are in the process of implementing a sideways at the moment, and we're not completed yet. We've got still more work to be done. However, it's encouraging to see that the monitoring devices we've got around the place indicates on average about 30% increase in cycling, in some areas up to 80%.
Jeez. Mr. Stanton.
Thanks, Stavros. We've already discussed some funding and expenditure and subsidies for the Rotorua Community Scheme. If you have a look on page 26, just at the end of your report there, note that we are still operating under a challenging environment and very tight project budget. I can envisage what the challenging environment is, but perhaps you could just clarify what you mean by those two statements.
Can you bring your mic closer, Jim?
Oh, sorry, I beg your
We're
pardon.
getting messages.
Did you not hear that?
Yeah, no, that's better. Thank you.
The challenging environment, through Mr. Chair, is that we do have a significant project that that anticipates the building of a treatment plant, anticipates the construction of a reticulation system connecting Rotorua to the treatment plant, and obviously installing pre-treatment systems onto each property in Rotorua. And suffice to say that for those of you who've been here much longer than I have been, that project has always been the subject of a degree of controversy, a degree of resistance by some people, and a degree of differences of point of view. And the challenging environment relates both to the engineering conditions, the local ground conditions, but also the fact that we are traversing cultural sites where we need to be extremely careful for accidental archaeological discoveries, and also to convince people who historically been resistant and objecting to that, to participate into the project.
JP, Mr. Stavros, one of the things I did last week was sign the contract for the Mamaku UV installation. The installation with the UV, that's to meet the drinking water standards. This is the last of our water supplies that will meet those minimum standards. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Mr. Chair. As you are well aware, especially since Havelock North, some extensive canvassing and investigations are taking place at the national level with regards to the quality of water. We are fortunate in Rotorua that we have now, with the Mamaku completing a double quality barrier, health barrier. We have UV for all sources of water, and we have a residual chlorination of our water. So with the completion of that project, we can say that our system is in fit condition to be providing the right standards for quality water as required by the legislation.
Thank you. Mr. Stanton, you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, Chair, just the second part of that question, Stavros, was around your comment on the very tight project budget. Have we got some cost overruns there, or some areas where the budget is being compromised by some action?
Through Mr. Chair, now we do have, as I said, I think we spoke about it some time ago, the budget for the Rotorua is about $35.5 million. That's the gross budget. We're receiving about $25 million from external sources like the Ministry of Health, the MFE, and the Regional Council to that effect. And as we, of course, are implementing the projects, and in a project of this nature, you do find conditions that actually require astute and prudent value engineering work to make sure we stay inside the budget. So there are challenges, and however, we are working towards the objective of staying inside the funding envelope for two reasons. One is that's a good project, prudent project management. The second reason is that the residents who will pay the net capital costs for that project, they have an expectation that their contribution will be inside a reasonable envelope, and we're trying our best to stay inside the envelope. So it's a challenge, but it's doable.
So we realise you've got to move away. I just want to, on page 27, this illustrates, I mean, whilst we have an LTP and we have a program of work, that shared bike scheme is really exciting in terms of a new element to Rotorua and taking advantage of the cycleways and that we've got. I've had no one, even those people on Ranulph Street whose properties, no one has complained. They love the width of those pathways. Safe for the kids, particularly in the morning of St Mary's and Glenholme School. So pass on our thanks, but that updating us on that shared bike scheme, I hope you're in a more positive mood, and that becomes reality at the next meeting. So thank you, Stavros. Well, I have to let him go. So it's a new comment? Okay.
Yeah, just on the sideways, have I got the floor?
Sorry, go.
Yeah, just an observation. The sideways are not just about getting our children safely to school. It's making Rotorua age-friendly, and anyone who's been on our sideways will see that they are marked share with care, and as has been alluded to already, and just stop for users, and that's multimodal users, to stop before they cross the road. So I think it's been rolled out in a very smart and clever way, and it's certainly a great enhancement for our community.
Finally, Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, we have come to an agreement that we'll do an inspection in Paradise Valley. Travis would come out and we'd have a drive-through or walk-through. Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to update the council is that there is a Paradise Valley Flood Catchment Committee that works. It has regular meetings. I am not part of that, and I've stayed away deliberately because of my situation of owning land there as well. But the area is called the Nongataha Catchment, Nongataha Valley Catchment, not the Paradise Valley Catchment. Okay. But the committee is that. So there's some confusion that was going down at one stage who owned what. We are very concerned because it's 15 months since the flood a year ago, what's taken place. Work is in progress, as been pointed out by Stravos. But the thing that is concerning us is that when work is in progress, the potable water that is taken out of the Nongataha stream is dirtied by machineries or stuff like that, and it's creating a problem for us people who take our water from that stream. So it's not only a road problem, it's also a drinking problem that we've got. We're working through it, and we're also working with the regional council, and hopefully over a period of time, as Travos has said, we'll work things through. But we are getting a little bit frustrated.
Fair comment, Stavros. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Stavros. We'll move back now to... Oh, we'll take a break for a couple of minutes so you can check your message. CFO Business Support Group on page 21. Are there any questions? Stay where you are, Thomas. Operations Group Henry, page 30. You've all had that information. I also want to say to Henry and the team, particularly in sport and recreation, we will get an update on the museum because the staff are here, and with SHMPAC, I think it's important we are updated there. I'm delighted with the consenting activity report. I think Councillor Kent, that's been one of your babies, is keeping an eye on that. I think that's a magnificent effort of 236 houses, new dwellings for 2 years. That doesn't include where I live. I've got a 900 square metre section and I can put a second dwelling on it without subdivision. So I think that's magnanimous. The other thing I wanted to say, Henry, before you start is, you know, we've got some fantastic staff. I mean, we saw earlier how our night market had got an award, but the Children's Hub, in running a pink breakfast for breast cancer, which is right outside their terms of reference of what they're paid for, outside of that, they go and raise $207 for our local breast cancer people. I think that's just an excellent initiative promoted by your staff, and please pass on the committee's thanks to them for that initiative. So we've got our gentleman from the museum. He looks a bit happier today. We just got some money the other day, so you should be happy. I would like to hear an update on that, Henry. I think we'll focus on the museum and SHMPAC we can at this stage. Welcome.
Okay. Kia ora, Mr. Chair and councillors and board members. So look, it's good having Stuart here, and Stuart's role is actually wider than just the museum now. Yes. But Stuart's it's got responsibility across the whole arts and culture sector. So I'll hand over to Stuart in a second just to highlight some of the developments, and particularly want to talk through the progress really, and the, I guess, the new style of reporting around our big building projects around SHMPAC and the museum, because I think it's quite easy for people to look for the first visible sign of movement, which is probably actually a crane over the buildings. And I think it's just important that we do keep highlighting that there's a lot of work going on behind, which is kind of the forerunner to actually, you know, getting the shovels into the ground. So we'll just keep on making sure we're providing you with the reports about what's actually happening. And the only thing I really want to highlight just before I hand on to Stuart around consenting was yeah, and Jeff touched on it earlier in terms of the work pressures really on particularly the planning and the building crew. And one of the really nice results that's come through at the end of June, so 1 month ahead of this report, is that we finished the year, I think, with 172 new dwellings, which was up on under 100 last year, and sort of well above our aspirational target in the housing accord. We are a bit down in terms of the subdivision lots, and as against our aspirations in the housing accord, but again, we've got a lot in the pipeline. Yeah. So look, it's feeling good at the moment in terms of just sustained growth. So I'll hand on to Stuart to take you through the
Thank you,
the arts and culture areas.
Welcome, Stuart.
Morena koutou, everybody. We'll just start with the SHMPAC redevelopment. So where we're currently at, so we're about to apply for our resource consent next week. We're hoping to get that through and completed by the first week in August, so we can make our funding windows through through lotteries. During the month of this month and next month, most of our funding applications will be complete. And then really if all those funding applications are successful, then we'll be pretty much, or very close to achieving the $18 million that we're looking for. We're obviously, you know, we are at I guess the risk is the number of applications going into those lotteries funds at the moment. I am aware that Hastings is presenting their application for the work being done at their Opera House and their creative precinct there as well. So we are up for some competition, but as I said, we're pretty optimistic. My partner in crime, Brett Marvelly, has really been a great help in pushing us along, and so that's fantastic. We're just in the process of signing up Shan Sheldon, and he's actually doing the resource consent work for us, and like I said, we're expecting to have that in next week. With the museum, really we're just in the final stages of negotiation with Heritage New Zealand on the 3 issues in the report, which was around the lightweight roof structure. So we're expecting to have a sample of the composite tile here next week, which has been tested in Yellowstone Park up in the States in terms of its corrosion resistant capability. And then really just a series of various reports and moving into the next phase, the design phase, and recruitment of our architect for this phase as well. And once again, just out there with expressions of interest for project managers, early contractor engagement for that project. In terms of the library, I just really want to give a heads up to the team there because they've been doing some great work there. In the report, here's a great story about an 86-year-old grandmother that hadn't seen her new granddaughter, and so the team organised to Skype Australia. Yes. For her, and so not something you'd normally expect in a library, but once again, just going that little bit further. Obviously, the visitor numbers are encouraging as well, so 16% up on the same time last year from the old library or the temporary library, but 20% up on the existing building. So that's really encouraging. And one of the things that we've been doing there is completing customer satisfaction surveys. We did that in the first couple of weeks. Our net promoter scores were sitting at 17 at that point. We're now up to 32. So we've doubled the satisfaction rate in these first few months, and I anticipate that will continue to develop over time. The other, I guess, keynote for me is the Hemo Sculpture project. So that's progressing well. We've been out there and had a look at the construction. So they have had some challenges with the cool temperatures in terms of curing carbon fibre, but they've done a very ingenious way of wrapping the carbon fibre tubes and plates and plastic bags basically and heating them through that, so a bit of Kiwi ingenuity. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. And look, if anybody is interested going out and having a look at that, then I'm more than happy to take people out. It is a really interesting project when you look at the bits and pieces that go to making it up and the 3D printing.
I think Stuart, there's an opportunity there. Maybe Jeff and senior management could take on board what Stuart was saying. There are a number of balls that are up in the air at the moment. For example, Rotorua Roadie, who I'd like to go out and have a look at that. So there are a number of these major projects that we've got in train, and I think that we should jump on a bus scheduled as one of our meetings and go and have a look with Stavros. I'd like to go out. I don't know what's happening out of Paradise Valley. I don't know what the problems are out there. So, I think a tiki tour along those lines. Stuart, while I've just interrupted you, what is your perception that every time I drive past, go down Arawa Street or Hope Upper Street, their playground is just inundated with kids, and not some young kids either, some older type kids as well. Is the flow on with the library hub and the children's hub and the playground? Is it working in your thoughts?
Look, I think it is working well. I mean, I know the playground in particular does get a lot of use with some of the older kids after school. It's great for parents waiting to catch a bus with children as well because there's something for them to do. But that whole, Jean Batten Square is very much part of the library in terms of its deliverables and events that will be happening there. So we will have a Bravehearts exhibition going into that space, which is a collaboration between Rotary, us RLC, and the DHB. And that'll be going in the first week of November, and then it'll sit there until the end of February.
Oh, excellent. You got something else, Stuart?
No, not on the... No,
okay, Your Worship?
I do want to acknowledge Te Aka Māori. This is the new community bumping space that we talked about, and it's achieved it. For those that can't get to everything, I'm down there on a weekly basis now. There's stuff happening there all the time, and it's really exciting. Marguerite Theron with the Multicultural Council held a lunch on Sunday, and she had over 100 people there. It's just a simply amazing space, and more people will ask councillors and board members, where could I go to hold something or host a seminar? It's a learning and an innovation space, and that second floor can take at least 150 people. So it's just proving its weight in gold. And I think when we see summer and oozing out into the Jean Batten Square with the lovely umbrellas, that's the new heart of our community now with the library. So congratulations for getting that ambience so quickly, actually, and changing the parking, because you always get those teething problems. But it's a fabulous space, and it's a community space. So, when you're getting exhibitions, because you haven't got exhibition space in Te Whare Taonga, and I've heard of another one from New York that wants to come in there. This is getting very exciting, and they're holding them right in the middle of the library. And that was the innovation that we hoped for. So it's already happening. It's a wonderful space.
Just one question I have, Stuart. We'll go on to Councillor Donaldson in the meantime. Do you know what activity the Friends of the Whare Taonga have got planned in terms of... I've had local people say, well, when can I help and raise some funds for it? I mean, it's all coming from philanthropic. I just wondered if you knew of any plans they had to raise public funds, or a public event, or a ball. I don't know what it ought to be, but people are asking, how can I then contribute to ensuring that that building is reinstated?
So the Friends of the Museum, they've got a number of activities.
Oh, Lowell Thurston's group, sorry.
The Rotorua Museum Centennial Trust.
Centre Trust.
So certainly. So there was a meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago. So the Trust has confirmed that it wants to be involved in fundraising. It obviously donated the $200,000 the other week as a start for that, and we have had some inquiries through Facebook already about how people can contribute. So there is another meeting planned with the RMCT in terms of a program moving forward. Whether it's a give a little page so the whole community can engage as well, but it's certainly on the agenda.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It seems you can't have a good news story without a whiff of controversy. So there was a post on a Facebook page that I was tagged into that there'd been a catastrophic failure of the toilets at Te Aka Māori, and I private messaged the person who tagged me in saying council should have notified about this and been transparent about it. But my understanding is that no hazardous waste escaped the environment, which would involve notifying regional council. But can you shed any light on the toilets at Te Aka Māori?
Yeah, so we have had some issues with the ground floor toilets. That's been resolved now. So there was a major cleaning out of the whole system there. So unfortunately, some of the public do put items down toilets that they shouldn't be. But also we did have an issue with the design of the particular toilets. They came from Australia, and so their water usage rates are really, really low, and that's not helping us. So we've made some adjustments to those as well.
So you're flush with ideas, Councillor Dawson. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Henry.
Just also just step on into the sport recreation area as well. So we've got Rob here as well.
Yep.
And probably just one of the things that Stuart didn't highlight, which really falls between Stuart and Rob's teams with the EEC, was the very successful hosting of the Tall Blacks match last week, and certainly the stadium was looking fantastic, and Jolene again did a superb job.
Just to highlight that, after the meeting, I don't normally contact staff, but the Worship and I were hosts of Basketball New Zealand in the VIP room, and the kudos that was coming towards Jolene and the Energy Event Centre staff was unprecedented in terms of them going out of their way to make it happen. The setting up, it was just superb. It looked fantastic on TV as well. I saw a replay of it. But the players loved it, and of course the announcement has just been made that we've got another game here against Lebanon as part of the... doesn't look like we'll be playing Australia. I think they might be suspended for a while after a bit of a fight with the Filipinos. But notwithstanding that, Henry, and I think I sent you a copy of the email as well as Jeff. I think that staff do need the support of us when we're there at the forefront of Worship and I, the forefront of getting the kudos, and I just passed it straight on to Jolene. She told me they had a debrief, and the major component that New Zealand basketball reiterated was the impact of the staff, from the catering staff, security staff, right through to the top with Jolene. So I think it's worthy that that be passed on and celebrated. So happy that you can highlight the report, and thank you, Rob, for the detail. Question, Your Worship?
Just a question. After the rollerbladers on Saturday night, there's a request for, is there a potential other venue for them to go to? And I think we need to look at, they're using Toi Ohomai, I think, for their training. Can we find a place, because it's a successful group doing other stuff? I don't know, Rob, what the answer is there.
Kia ora koutou, everybody, and through you, Mr. Chair, that the rollerbladers are difficult to find a spot for. They require an indoor facility of a particular size. We have been trying to assist them with. We have very limited public facilities, but we've been trying to assist them with looking for either other community facilities like the halls, which there is a bit of a resistance to their activity because it's a perception only about potential damage from the skates, and then the other one is actually trying to look for affordable commercial activities, but that's going to require a more coordinated multi-use type of thing. So it's something that we're continually keeping an eye out for, put it that way.
Well, Worship and I got the brunt of that on Saturday night, but the reality is I'm waiting for them to provide a business case in conjunction with Rotorua Skating Club and the Derby people for a purpose-built building. So, they're out there. That one up at Westbrook may be able to be converted or bought or whatever. But it's a huge sport, and it's growing, and the Rotorua girls are doing so well. Just on page 36, the Aquatic Centre, I see, Henry, the activity is still strong, and users are just growing. Is there anything you want to report on the Aquatic Centre? Rob?
If I can briefly, yes, it's very busy. We're working through with the contract negotiations with CLM for undertaking the operational component of the management there. We've had 33 of the existing staff have taken the decision to transfer from Rotorua Lakes through to CLM, and we've had 8 who were offered a position but have decided to take a redundancy. That process is due to be confirmed basically at the end of next week, or very early the week after, and then we'll be rolling into the operation there with CLM.
Excellent.
Probably quickly, if I can just touch on highlights. Under the sports development, I think there's a key piece of work that's being done with regard to our sports fields, is to understand the picture about demand for sports fields and the supply that we have, because councillors may recall over various LTPs all sorts of submissions from clubs and things about we need a new this and we need a new that and we need more space. And so there's a piece of work that's going on nationally that we've joined in with, actually understanding what is the club demand for our fields and what are the capacities for our fields. Do we need new ones, or can we make our existing ones better able to cope with more activity on them through drainage, lights and better coordination of use? So that's a fairly major piece of work that's going to happen over the early part of this year, which will help inform our capital program going forward from that. So I think that's a sort of a key thing for councillors to be aware of for when they do get contacted by clubs and things like that as to what's happening. We'll be in a much more informed position once this work's done.
Any questions? Because we've got to move on to T-Rex. Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for... now move to page... in the confidential part of the back, which is not now confidential. On page 40, you've had the report. I've read it from cover to cover. Also asked... I'm happy to move that the report Future the T-Rex Limited Partnership and T-Rex 2013 Limited be received. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Rotorua take. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Would someone like to move that the committee recommends to council to instruct the chief executive presentation for you? Sorry, Thomas, I'm jumping the gun. Here we go.
Just a quick PowerPoint and just walk you through. So, I'll take the paper as read, but just spend a little bit of time going through for those that obviously aren't aware of probably the background of this. So T-Rex is a partnership between Rotorua Lakes Council and Scion. The partnership has been in place since 2008. However, even as early as 2005, there were some early discussions and early research with Scion with regards to this partnership. For those that don't know what the partnership is, it is about finding a long-term sustainable solution to dealing with sludge from the wastewater treatment plant, particularly in a sustainable environmental way. Landfilling and even vermiculture at times are not considered to be that sustainable into the long term. And that's originally where it started from, and it was a view of turning waste to gold with regards to extracting out of those biosolids and being able to use materials that would otherwise go to landfill in a more meaningful way. In early 2013 or 2012, pretty much late 2012, the successful pilot plant was built. That was one that was set in the container and obviously was moved down to the wastewater treatment plant, and it proved successful that the process itself could do what it was supposed to do with regards to vaporizing. I'm not a technical person, but obviously those biosolids. So therefore, in late 2012 and early 2013, the council moved and consulted on formalising that partnership with Scion, and that was around the time that the limited partnership and the company were formed, and that was pretty much done in February 2013. The goal, obviously, to commercialise and build a demonstration plant, and obviously our wastewater treatment plant was seen as that demonstration plant at that time. During that time, though, there was an election and the new council came on board, and I think one of those ones at that time was looking at this project and looking at the business case of this project, and it went through a period of time whereby the project was held. The business case was reviewed a number of times, was given the green light to proceed a certain element of it. But by 2015, effectively the whole progress of the the pilot plant being built at the wastewater treatment plant was stopped, and effectively what happened was that more to do with obviously the nitrogen limits that were being on board and the nitrogen being reintroduced back into the new wastewater treatment plant with regards to the new consent and exiting the forest, and the nitrogen discharge that would have happened to the lake. And it was seen at that time that the cost involved of obviously mitigating the nitrogen that would go back into the system was just too expensive. And so therefore the council decided not to proceed with the demonstration plant. With regards to the company though, the technology obviously is still valid and has value. And the company was seeking alternatives in New Zealand around building a pilot plant, but also in Australasia and even wider into Asia. In December 2017, both Scion and Rotorua Lakes Council ceased ongoing funding into the company, so we put our last cash call in, and the company was instructed that they needed to find a capital partner that would introduce capital into the mix to build a pilot plant, whether that was for Rotorua or for someone else, and also to fund the ongoing costs of the company structure. So there were two quite significant leads, one in India, which was around scaling down or value adding, making a cheaper version of the plant in an Indian market while using the same technology. That was successful. However, the entity there has elected not to proceed. And there was another lead into the Chinese market. They did put forward a formal offer with regards to acquiring capital into the business, so effectively buying into the intellectual property, but that offer just was not deemed sufficient. Yeah. So therefore, as a result, we've started discussions with Scion about formally winding up the partnership. So what I do want to reiterate, though, is that both Scion and us still see in the future there's the potential to extract value out of the investment that both parties had made. What we are recognising is that the ongoing company structure and the costs associated with maintaining a company are seen as prohibitive, and we would therefore like to reduce the cost structure going forward while still protecting each partner's investment into it. And should there be an ability in the future to extract value out of this, then obviously having an arrangement in place where we retain that value or extract out of it. And so that's what we're working on with Scion. We're both in agreement with hopefully of how we could potentially do that, but obviously there are some commercial and legal negotiations that obviously need to take place going forward, and that is what we are seeking your approval to proceed with.
Thank you, Thomas. Your Worship?
It's just, I'd like to say something, but questions first. So,
oh no, go for it.
Look,
had a pretty good meeting.
My question first, before I say anything, is about the intellectual property that has been substantially invested. How do we protect that in the structure that you propose as a sort of holding entity?
Yep, so the intellectual property is owned by the company or limited partnership at the moment, and that's held protected via patents into a number of markets, so obviously we'd have to retain the ongoing costs of maintaining those patents. What we are considering is whether a different entity can hold the intellectual property, but there's a legal documentation contracts that sit in around that still protect each of our investments into that. So therefore one of the parties would accept the transfer of that intellectual property, and it'd likely be Scion, because obviously any future value extracted out of this would be on the work that Scion would do going forward, and that if they were successful in extracting some value, then obviously we'd protect our investment going forward with regards to having a legal agreement around how that value would be shared. And that's obviously something we need to work through. And
my other question is how, when you're looking at other regions and the country's focus on waste streams, how do we make sure that this technology remains ahead of the front of mind for other councils, that this is here, it's been invested in, it just was never fully commercialised? Because I know through other councils they're all looking at how to manage sludge, and how do we do it. And so while we were leaders here in investing in new technology, is that now Scion's role to keep this in front of other councils?
Look, that is something that we need to consider as to how best to do that going forward and how that would be structured. So that's Your Worship forms part of the discussion that we need to have. Yep.
Right. And then I'll speak after.
Councillor Kent, question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you. Am I right in thinking that this council invested in excess of $10 million in this project?
To my understanding, I think it's about 7.8 million.
Yeah.
Okay, so say 7.8 million. Am I correct? I have been informed and unsubstantiated that the offer to acquire the shareholder in the company that was received from a Chinese consortium was for $1.
Because we're not in confidential, I'm not prepared to obviously discuss commercial offers and those sorts of things that were done in the course of business. So I'll leave it for people to speculate as to what that may be.
Okay, well, I'd like to draw attention to Council of what the Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Company has done, who, for those that are unaware, came up with the Ruataniwhau water storage scheme, developed a lot of intellectual properties, assets and so on associated with it. As a result of a Supreme Court decision preventing Department of Conservation land being exchanged, the whole thing was canned.
Right.
So basically we have a parallel scenario here where we have assets. In this case we've got a box with all sorts of pipes on it that actually does something, and we actually have some intellectual property. What you're suggesting here is that we just leave that in abeyance and that this council gets absolutely zero return whatsoever, except for a wing and a prayer that Sion might, at some stage in the future, be able to get a return from it. What the Hawke's Bay Regional Investment Company did was they put an ad out asking for expressions of interest to purchase all part of the residual assets, consents and intellectual property developed in association with the scheme. Some private individuals got together and forked over $100,000 for it. And I think this council should do exactly the same. We should put out expressions of interest to see if anyone wishes to purchase all the assets, the intellectual property, and actually get a return for the money. We cut our losses, we get out of it clean now and get something back, not just a wing and a prayer in the future.
What's your thoughts on that, Thomas?
Well, that is something that the company's actually already been doing. So with regards to this offer that you've talked about, that they have actually been pursuing offers of acquiring that value. I think the issue has always been that the value will only be extracted when a pilot plant has been built with regards to a fully operating one, and that's always seems to have been the challenge with extracting that value. In addition, so it is likely therefore going forward because while we are part owners in the intellectual property, most of that know-how does sit with Sion and its staff, so we will therefore be, working with them in their endeavours to ensure that we can extract value out of this going forward.
So is there, are you saying that we've actually gone out and advertised to see if there are people interested, or have we just gone traipsing around the world trying to sell it to people?
I know, I understand the Board of Directors have been actively engaging with parties throughout New Zealand and Australasia and into the Chinese market as to whether they wish to invest into the company and the technology.
Then I suggest that before we actually go down this track that we actually invest in a small advertisement and see what actually comes of it.
Or even on our website.
Perhaps if I table this, we'll give it to the Chief Executive as an example of what can be done.
Sure. Mr. Williams wants to make a comment.
Through the chair, one of the issues that I think we can see the company has had, and is one of the challenges from a New Zealand perspective, is that there is an acceptance at this particular point of time that actually biosolids, it's appropriate for them to go to a landfill environment or alternatively to vermiculture. And that is actually the current state of where the environmental way of managing biosolids exist. I think the real issue is that in the future, what I hear is that is unlikely to continue as an acceptable approach. At that point of change, alternative technologies such as this one will be completely different with regards to their attractiveness. And I think one of the things, therefore, is that with regards to creating any return on this technology, it's actually about timing. If you try and float a technology at a point where there are alternatives that are currently acceptable, that are effectively cheaper, then the technology is not a good solution. But at a point where some of those alternatives are no longer acceptable, then all of a sudden the value of the technology will change. No, so I think that's, within discussion with Scion, one of the key considerations that they've got as to the timing here.
I think, Mr. Williams, the recommendation 3, number 2, sums up what Councillor Kent, what Her Worship and others have been thinking. I mean, this was a very ambitious jump forward for this council. We took some risks. The proposal was sound, it was soundly based. One of the areas I thought that we may have missed the boat on was, whilst we collaborated with Scion, we didn't collaborate with the other 87 territorial or regional authorities throughout New Zealand to get a buy-in to set up an ownership, because I think every territorial and regional authority has got the issue of sludge, regardless of what type of sewage treatment plant they've got. Everyone's got the issue. So I think if you're happy to move, Councillor Kemp, because you through the candle open, that the committee recommends to council to instruct the chief executive to start the process of winding up the T-Rex Limited Partnership, T-Rex 2013 Limited, by working with Scion on the future ownership of the intellectual property, and to take all necessary steps to protect council's investment should future value be able to be extracted from the T-Rex intellectual property. Are you happy to move that, Councillor Kent?
I'm happy to move that, but with the insertion of the words where it says that the committee recommends to council to instruct the chief executive to start the process of winding up the T-Rex Limited Partnership, T-Rex 213 Limited, by working with Scion on the future ownership or sale of the intellectual property, and to take all steps necessary to protect the council's investment.
Someone's happy to second that with that "or sale" word in there? Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, you can comment.
Legacy project that I think we should be proud of, actually. And sadly, it didn't come to pass. I think the right mechanism was in place to try to get this commercialised. And I was there when the waste minimisation bill was enacted in Parliament, and they set up an entity that would invest in new technology for waste stream management, including sludge and including others that are becoming a real challenge in the market at the moment. And that's where we got the subsidy from MFE to kick-start this partnership. So it wasn't council alone, and it was driven with a partnership from MFE and interested councils. And council at that time were very proactive on this issue. We saw that there was going to be problems in the future with sludge and shipping our sludge to other territorial authorities, and they had a go, and I think that was right at that time. And we've supported it and watched it unfold to where we are today with a wise decision. But I can see in the future this is going to come again, and so I don't want to let it go entirely, because I think this is technology that you could also work with the Crown on again, and other authorities were involved because we took this concept around the country, but they weren't even thinking in this space then. It's a real future space, like the bioplastics that Scion were in at that time. So I'd like to congratulate our partner Scion for also working with Council, stepping it through until it became inevitable to this point today. And this is a wise decision of this council. But we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And that's what's really important with what we're facing in the future about waste management in this country. So I second this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Stevie, for those words. Couple of questions, please, Mr. Chairman. Is that what is it costing this council now per year?
What is our commitments?
So you'll recall, councillors and board members, that we're not providing any more ongoing funding going forward. So we removed funding from our long-term plan, and we ceased contributions to the company in December 2017. So nothing going forward.
Can I ask the question the other way around then? What would it have cost the company if they hadn't, if the council hadn't done what Mr. Tom?
What the ongoing costs?
Yeah.
The ongoing costs of the company, I think, were about $700,000 to $800,000 per annum, with regards to obviously the structure and what it was intending to do. So that would have been the ongoing.
And are there any ongoing costs to protect the intellectual property?
Yes, there will be. So there are currently some surplus funds, and we're just working through obviously the best structure of holding those. Those surplus funds could either be returned or retained to maintain the patents on the intellectual property for a period of time, and then obviously at the end of that period of time a decision would need to be made by both partners if no opportunities arisen as to where to from then, and obviously we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, obviously I'm asking the wrong track of question. What I wanted to know was, if we mothball the situation with this council and Scion, what is it costing to keep the company registered? No, don't worry about the protection, just the register of the name of Terex Limited.
Oh, and that's something that we're working through, and to be honest, when you mothball a company and you move into that area, it's next to nothing. So it's an almost an insignificant amount to retain that.
Mr. Martin, do you have any further questions?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. If you have a look at the Auckland situation at the moment, where they've got polluted harbours up there, I think we've got an ally, very much so, in Auckland. I don't know what they're doing, I wouldn't have a clue what they're doing. But at the moment they've been pointing fingers at farmers about polluting. And they've got a pollution problem bigger than what farmers have got throughout New Zealand. When we went through this process, we knew what we were basically doing. We wanted to be out of the forest as well. That was always behind us in that aspect as well. We knew we had something to sell with the sludge. We tried to get market gardeners and all that sort of thing involved. We also knew that the fact is that we never had the financial backing to go out and do that advertising. We also had a health problem, whether it needed to be sterilised and all that sort of thing as well. It was a bold move. And the world hasn't improved any better with that sort of issues that we're still going to be faced with. To cut it short, Mr. Chairman, I'd be voting no to sell it. I believe this council should basically put the whole thing into mothballs and hold it in conjunction with Scion, keep our company registered, and see what the future brings us if we're not outlaying a fortune of money. I have the feeling is that we're a little bit premature. We registered in 13, it's now only 18, and the world is changing and New Zealand is changing dramatically with waste problems. Climate change has also come on board. We've got carbon credits and that sort of thing as well. And I'm not going down in detail, but I don't support the motion that we should get rid of it or put it up for sale, Mr. Chairman. I'd be voting no. I don't have the permission to vote no from my rule board, but as an ex-councillor at that particular time when this was started way back in 2018, I thought we were on a winner, and I still believe you are.
Look, we're running... No, I'm not going to take any more questions.
You could clarify it, though. It only suggests or sale. It's not saying
it's got to come back here, Bob.
No instruction.
Right, we've got to move in a second that the committee recommends the council instruct the chief executive to start the process of winding up Terex Limited by working with Sion on the future ownership or sale of the intellectual property and to take all steps necessary to protect council's investment should future value be able to be extracted from the T-Rex intellectual property. Am I correct in reading that if we do get a proposal from the Auckland Regional Authority, we will work with whatever they want in terms of the sale or a joint ownership proposal, and it would come back to this council? Been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Also like to express my concerns as a rural board that we never had the opportunity to, as I understand, to discuss something like this. I'm not happy to sit in this council and have an important issue like this, and I stand to be corrected because my chairman's up here at the moment. We don't get enough information to make our decisions. And I believe a situation like this, that the rural board should have had a meeting to sit down and discuss it. And I don't know whether Te Arawa's had the same situation, but to put something on the agenda like this to sell an asset that has been working, or try to get it to work for quite some time, and without the prior information, I feel absolutely gutted that I've never had any facts to give you people why we went into it, the original,
Point
when
taken.
I was a councillor. Thank you.
Point taken. Councillor Tapsell, urgent item.
Yes,
do you want us to move into confidential?
No, I was just going to suggest the issue. I have spoken with the Chief Executive about it. It has been resolved, and I'm happy to just send an email around to councillors to update them.
Thank you very, very much. I therefore declare the meeting closed, and thank you for your cooperation. We covered some very, very topical issues today. Thank you to staff, Una and the team, and I wish you a good day. Thank you.